Welcome into another edition of the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels. A little bit of an SEC baseball edition of the podcast today. Going to talk some football as well. Got some All SEC teams starting to come out and some interesting selections on those. So we're going to talk about that. Carter, how you doing?
Good, man. Doing great.
Hanging in there. This is obviously a busy week with the SEC tournament going on. We were talking about this before we went on the show, that it feels like, it's just game after game after game these days, depending on how long you advance. And we got to give a quick shout out as well to the Texas A&M women's golf team. Made it all the way to the NCAA tournament semifinals. Kind of ran out of gas there, but another really strong season there, and congratulations to them on reaching that point, knocking out Texas in the first round of the match play. That'll always, there was some fun banter. I know you had a little fun on Twitter with that. The two sides were kind of going at it. They've met in a couple different postseason settings the last few weeks.
Yeah, I love it. Texas kind of took a shot at A&M. It was like your actions have consequences or something, and then A&M's women's golf team put out like, oh, your actions have consequences or something like that. So it was a funny shot, and it really is crazy how many postseasons formats these two teams have met. Baseball last year, obviously, women's soccer. And then they were really close in men's basketball. A&M just had to beat Penn State and they would have played. And then softball and now women's golf. And you get this sense that like these tournament committees, they just salivate at the mouth at the opportunity to match them up. And that's why, you look at D1 baseball's projections earlier this week, and what's the projection? Oh, A&M as a 3 seed in the Austin Regional. I'm like, oh, of course, of course.
There we go.
We'll see if that plays out, but would be a fun one.
No doubt, they're kind of following the trend and thinking we know which direction this is going. Speaking of that A&M baseball squad, we were kind of debating on what day we were going to kind of do this podcast, because obviously A&M and Tennessee were playing in a single elimination game on Tuesday, and kind of thought, well, let's see how they do in that one and go from there. And we have a lot to talk about after that game. And a lot of it is due to the performance of Troy Wansing and what he was able to do. Goes 8 innings for A&M, allows 1 hit, strikes out 7 in a victory over Tennessee. A&M limited a pretty good offensive lineup in Tennessee to 1 hit. And just a really, really impressive all-around performance. And for me, and I think kind of looking at the projections, kind of solidifies probably their spot in the field, barring anything totally crazy happening. But they also get their way into double elimination now. Just watching that, we've obviously kind of seen Wansing have some struggles over the course of this season. What'd you take away from that start and what was working for him?
Man, obviously the best of his career so far. And, going in that game, I think, what he showed last year at Purdue and why they got him, they always thought he had the talent, but I think he just got in his head too much this year and really struggled with his command. I mean, he really was a walk machine. There'd be innings where he'd walk 3 batters in a row. I think he had like 30 or so walks on the season going into the game. Had 0 walks, and there were points where like his strike percentage were out of this world. It wasn't like he was getting a ton of ground balls on 3-1 counts. Like he was throwing a lot of strikes, and I think he ended up with like 7 strikeouts. But
7 strikeouts.
Going into this game, they desperately needed him to go at least like 4 innings. With this pitching staff, before that game, they had only gone 6+ innings 5 times all year. It has been a real struggle for these starters. And going in this game, coming off the weekend, this was the one game where they were going to have to figure it out. It was a one game, today against Arkansas, they'll be able to have Nathan Detmer. Then, you can bring – after that, you can bring Justin Lampkin back. You can bring back some of your other guys in that starting rotation. But yesterday they had to kind of figure it out, patch together those 9 innings. And they still had guys like Evan Ashenbeck available. I don't know if Will Johnson would have been available, but it definitely was not – it was a limited options out of the bullpen and the starting group. So they were hoping to just kind of figure it out. I didn't think they went into that game thinking, oh, it's Wansing going 8 innings or even 5 or 6 innings. I think they were like, okay, you can give us 4, and then we get 2 from this guy, 2 from that guy, 1 from that guy. I think it was honestly that kind of thing. So for him to go to 8 innings, and then it was timed perfectly with the rain delay.
Yep.
Because, Schlossnagle said after the game, he was like, we were definitely taking him out at the end of the 8th, and then obviously in the top of the 9th, 1 out was the rain delay. Had that happened in the 5th or 6th inning, it would have really screwed A&M because it would have obviously knocked off, Troy from his kind of momentum. But then it's you can't just for 2 hours sit there and then throw again. So to me, it was a perfect storm, pun intended, for A&M. We also got to talk about Jace LaVallette. I mean, that was
he was going to be next. He's just been on a tear lately. Hit another home run on Tuesday in a day where it wasn't that easy to hit. There was obviously a rain coming down the entire game, kind of a lighter rain, and then it obviously got heavier towards the end. But I mean, that was just a missile out of there. And what he did in the Mississippi State series, he kind of talked about it. He's got more and more comfortable as this SEC season's gone along. He's had I think he talked in the post-game press conference about some conversations that he had with Jack Moss and some of the advice that he's given him. And, he's just provided such a boost to this lineup. You were kind of waiting for, guys to kind of wake up and provide a middle of the order bat. And he's definitely done that. To your point, I think, yeah, you kind of, we're going to ride Wansing as long as you possibly could to could he get through 7? Okay, now he's got through 7, was super efficient. Could he get through 8? And, really puts this pitching staff in it as okay spot as you can be going forward. Obviously, this is a tournament that can really tax your pitching staff in a hurry. And so for him to be able to do that in game 1, set the pitching up nicely and heading into the, as long as they're going to be around in Hoover, and it was just a clutch performance. But Jace LaVallette, I mean, what he's been able to do, this to me feels like a different A&M team than the ones that played earlier in the year with a guy like LaVallette. Obviously, you got, they kind of asked Jim Schlossnagle about, some of the differences, and he said, well, we got Brett Minish back as well. So, where do you kind of think this lineup kind of sits now with the way LaVallette's been playing lately?
So you asked me a couple months ago, I'd be so down on this team. I mean, really in March, especially during the NCAA tournament run or the run that the basketball team was on in the SEC and spring football, it was like, geez, this baseball team, they're not giving anyone reason to kind of pay attention to them. And, I'd go to some of these games and obviously watch all the games. And it was just like, gosh, this pitching is disgusting. This starting pitching, none of these guys can go 5 innings, 6 innings on a consistent basis. It's, they're getting hammered in the first and second inning almost every game. And they're having to come back from behind, 6-0 a lot of times. The hitting started to pick up, and once they brought back Minnick, once Werner got healthy, and then once Jace LaVallette came on, that was like a trio that really sparked it for A&M because Jack Moss, outside of maybe the first couple weeks of the season, he's been amazing and back to what he was last year. Hunter Haas has been amazing and, probably got snubbed for All-SEC. But those two guys have been kind of your steady guys. But that middle of the lineup, they had so much struggle with Austin Bose and Ryan Targoch and Brett Minnick not being in the lineup and Trevor Warner not being in the lineup. And then Jace LaViolette, even there were times kind of early in the season where he had this little freshman slump. And, I remember going to the Portland game where he had his walk-off hit. And I think he was in like an 0 of 17 stretch. Yep. And, he's kind of talked about how, like, at the beginning, he took baseball way too seriously. And it's been kind of funny to hear him. He's like, hey, no one died. Like, no one, your family's good. Your friends are good. Like, just because you struck out doesn't mean that you need to, like, go into this deep depression and, like, be really down on yourself. And I think that was the problem from the beginning. And learning from a guy like Jack Moss helped him understand that, like, hey, it's baseball. And my tone on this team has really changed because the pitching has always been suspect. If they lose in the postseason, it'll be because of their pitching. But like, their hitting is starting to get to where it was a little bit last year, where like Jace LaViolette he's not a freshman anymore. He almost is like this veteran, like, draft pick that's on your team.
Right.
He's almost your Dylan Rock from last year at this point with the way he's playing. And then you've got two other guys you feel amazing about. And then Warner and Minnick are obviously fantastic players. So feel great about them. I think they're getting some bullpen arms that they trust. Like Evan Aschenbeck has been pretty reliable for most of the season. Brandon Garcia, I think that's a guy that Schloss has really trusted recently. Will Johnson is a guy who can start for you. He can relieve for you. They have a few arms in there that they can kind of trust. Starting wise, I think it might just be in the postseason who's hot, right? I mean, they've got a lot of options there. They've got a lot of guys who have made starts this season, so that could benefit them if they have to pull a guy's leash, early on. But I think today will be informative, seeing how Detmer does. This could be his last start before the postseason. He'll be their Friday guy. He'll be their number one guy in the postseason. So you'd like to gain some confidence with him as well. And you have him and Wansing rolling before the postseason, and even Lampkin as well after what he showed last weekend. I think you can feel a lot better about this team. And again, just night and day from what it was in March.
Kind of has not saying that A&M's going to, make a run to the College World Series and all that, but it kind of has a little bit of the feeling about last year where the pitching staff was kind of put together and cobbled together and just kind of hoping for good starts from, Micah Dallas and Nathan Detmer and down the stretch of last year too. It wasn't like, there was a dependable Friday guy last year either. And it's kind of got that feeling as well. If you can just get just enough, like I think Jim Schlossnagel's talked about it. If you can just get a guy to 5 innings or get a guy some into the 6th inning at times, you can start to bring guys that have length. Wansing is pitched out of the bullpen now, has that experience, obviously doing that in the Mississippi State series. Can he come out of the bullpen and help you? Can Will Johnson, obviously, like you mentioned, has experience? It's going to be an interesting team to watch, and we'll see how long, the run, the difficult draw, obviously, in the SEC tournament bracket. And then you kind of see just what happens in a regional. They're going to, find out probably. They're going to obviously find out Monday where they're going and what's going on there. But they're, it's a team that's just it's going to go as far as the offense probably takes them, and they're just going to need just enough pitching to get there. So going to be an interesting kind of couple of days to see how this kind of all turns out. And we'll certainly be here next week to kind of look ahead to the draw and where things go for them. We're going to switch gears after a quick break and talk a little football. As I mentioned, a couple all-SEC teams came out, some interesting selections, and we're going to talk a little more about that. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break. Welcome back into the GigEm247 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Karels. Going to talk a little football. Athlon released earlier this week. They're all SEC teams, and A&M was actually pretty well represented on them on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Evan Stewart and Anais Smith got first team offense recognition. Damani Richardson, first team defense. McKinley Jackson, second team defense. Nick Constantino, second team specialist. Bryce Foster, third team offense. Layden Robinson, fourth team offense. We have a fourth team for the Athlon, and Shamar Turner, fourth team defense. Now, there was a name missing from there that I think everybody kind of immediately noticed. Moose Muhammad. I thought it was interesting that he wasn't on there, and going back through the statistics, obviously it kind of came on the latter portion of last year. Were you surprised he wasn't on there, and what did you kind of make of that?
Yeah, the last 5 or 6 games, he was the most productive receiver on A&M. I still don't think he's the best receiver. I think that's Evan Stewart. I think he deservedly got a first team offense honor there. And Anais Smith, though, getting first team, I think that was more of a reputation kind of recognition. It was more of a, hey, we know your name a little bit more, and you've been around longer, and you had a couple great seasons, and we're just gonna give it to you there. But Moose is the better player and will likely start over Anais. Now, you know how I've been talking about, hey, I don't know about them both, like Anais just being a backup. That kind of, since I've said that, has changed. I've kind of changed my tone there, because when you hear that Noah Thomas has been the best player on the whole offense this spring, you're kind of like, okay, all right, probably Noah Thomas and Moose then. But Anais is someone who, Jimbo's talked all year about him being used as Deebo Samuel this year and playing running back, playing receiver. I think they'll move him around, get him his snaps. But Moose will be the guy who will probably out-snap him and out-produce him. So, yeah, that was surprising. Maybe even more surprising, though, maybe not more surprising, but it was still surprising, was the Walter Nolan omission. Just because, guys, he was the number 1 recruit in this crazy class, and he's going to start next year. And he was amazing in the spring, and he played a lot as a true freshman. So, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. He could be a better player than McKinley Jackson this year, who was on the list. I was laughing at the fourth team. A couple other guys, though, that I was thinking about. I don't know if they can be all SEC. Maybe they're honorable mention. Maybe they're third team all SEC. But Tony Grimes and Tyreek Chappelle, this has been a pretty good secondary the last couple of years. Grimes was a second-team All-ACC guy 2 years ago, 2021 season. And Chappelle's always been a pretty good corner. He just hasn't been All-SEC level. So him stepping up as that guy with Jones out and in the NFL now, can he kind of assume that role as the number 1 corner and kind of get that recognition? And then obviously there's like all freshman honors that we'll be looking out for. Ruben Owens will probably be a guy that could get, all freshman honors eventually. But Ruben Father, probably another guy I'll mention. Just if he kind of rebounds from last year, makes that next step, he could be someone that could be an all SEC guy in my mind.
No doubt. Yeah, Tyreek Chappelle was one. Kind of when he wasn't mentioned, I kind of went through the list of statistics, and look, there's a lot of really good DBs in the SEC. That's one fact that has to be noted, and that's a tough list to crack. But he was, tied for 21st last season in passes defended, 10th in top 10 in passes broken up. So probably right in that group that you could see him if he is a guy that takes over, as obviously that number 1 corner and could be a guy that I think ends up on a lot of postseason lists, but what isn't necessarily getting that buzz now. Now, going through the Moose statistics, yeah, I certainly kind of felt like he deserved to be on there. He was ranked 11th in the SEC last season, averaging 61 yards per game, 10th in yards per reception. Obviously, some of his big games had 8 receptions for 112 yards and TD against Ole Miss, 6 receptions for 119 yards and a TD against Mississippi State, and 5 receptions for 94 yards and a score against LSU. So obviously, kind of showed some of that big play potential, and if he's producing that on a more consistent basis this year, he'll find his way onto those lists kind of at the end of the year. But no doubt, I think the potential is certainly there. And look at some other guys. I think some other guys that could potentially get recognition is Edgerrin Cooper. He's another guy that if he can kind of put it all together as heading into this year, he could be a guy that I think could kind of work his way onto the list. And Cam Dewberry had his moments as well last year. So I think there's a lot of guys. I think, what do you make of how many guys? Because obviously coming off a 5-7 year, it probably would have been understandable if A&M had 1 to 2 guys on there, 2 to 3 guys on there, and gone in completely under the radar. What do you think about how many guys they had on there? Is it just a recognition of the talent that they have, or?
Well, when you have 4 teams, there's a lot of guys.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think anyone talking about this team nationally understands this team's got a lot of talent. I think there are differing views on just how talented they are. Some people think they've got top 5 talent. Some people think it's a little bit overrated. But I think no one doubts the fact that they at least are like top 15, top 10 in that range of talent. And when you have that amount, I mean, it's hard to not have guys in there. But I think like a guy like Evan Stewart's been someone. I think this receiver group is definitely sold short, going back to the Moose thing, because like I've been seeing all these preseason lists and Stewart's not mentioned anywhere. It's like, oh, here are your top 10 receivers in college football. Here are your top 20 receivers in college football. It's like people don't even know that Evan Stewart still plays, And I'm like, guys, did y'all watch the Alabama game last year?
He's a freshman, too.
Did y'all watch what this guy can freaking do? Yeah, and so I just see him taking that huge leap this year and being a top 10 receiver in college football. I really think he's that talented. And then Moose obviously is a guy that I think can be a middle round draft pick for A&M, depending on how this season goes. So you'd like to think that he could be a second team, third team All-SEC guy. Noah Thomas, he's a little bit of the wild card and Ananias Smith too, but Noah Thomas, it's like we hear about it, but we'll see. Like we've heard Jimbo hype up guys before that have not done anything, or hyped up a guy and then it's like a year later they come on. So Noah Thomas a little bit in wait and see mode, but definitely feel optimistic about him. But just overall, when you think about that as your top 4, I just can't help but think, man, how many receiving corps in the country are better than this top 4?
Yeah.
To me, can you name me 7? Like, I just can't. Like, to me, I think it's way up there as far as among the best. D-line as well was well represented on this group with McKinley Jackson, Shamar Turner. But there's other guys, I think, that will crack that, as we mentioned. Walter Nolan, I think, can be, that second team All-SEC kind of player. Really think he could be a dominant player this year, especially the next year, 2024. So, yeah, those are the 2 groups when we talk about the strength of this team, receiver and D-line. And to me, you just have to think that there's going to be like at least 2 All-SEC players in both groups.
No doubt. And you mentioned the defensive line. You could go down that list and pick 3, 4 other guys, and it wouldn't be a bad, Shamar Stewart. You could make an argument for him. You could make an argument Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy's a former 5-star. What if he comes in, right? He was obviously injured last year. And so what if he can come in and kind of immediately contribute? And then Fidel Diggs is another one. Like there's guys on that list right below, right, that you could add and say these need, they've just got to put it to get all together. And that's kind of been the storyline with A&M going back the last couple of years. They're immensely talented. Can everything in the recipe kind of taste good and come out all right? Because if it can, this is a really good team. And that's kind of the question this year. You mentioned, I was just curious because you mentioned about the argument about Evan Stewart being a top 10 receiver in the league. He ranked 8th in the country last year in yards per game, average yards per game as a receiver. So he's kind of already right in that group. But you're right, he doesn't really get the mention of being
No one talks about him.
top.
I swear.
Nobody talks about him, and he doesn't
Yeah.
get the buzz. But as a freshman, ranked 8th in the SEC last season in yards per game, as a in receiving it. So some of those guys are now gone off to the NFL. Obviously, Jalen Hyatt's one that obviously had a lot of buzz. Jonathan Mingo is the guy that's off to the is off to the NFL, and so I think you're right there. I think you're right that Evan Stewart's a guy that could be playing his way into the top 10 in the country in SEC and might already be there.
Yeah. And I'm reiterating, it's not SEC, it's top 10 in the country.
It's 10 in the country, yeah.
Yeah. I think the world of what he could do. And now he's finally got a quarterback that can throw him the ball. I mean, he was doing this with the corpse of Haynes King last year against Alabama. His quarterback play with all the injuries. Like you think about the Alabama game with the Haynes King being hurt, like he was still able to. Like I just think of that play on that final drive where he high points the ball.
Yeah,
I'm just like, how many receivers can make those kind of plays in college football consistently? And yeah, he's top 10 for me. And I bet you it'll take only a couple games because of his notoriety. It's like people know him, they just aren't thinking about him. But he'll make people think about him soon. It'll take 1 or 2 games, and then everyone will say, "Okay, yeah, I remember this guy."
Yeah. Okay. We'll put this guy. This guy he's starting to live up to that. And Bobby Petrino's offense, how he's going to be featured in that. I think he's going to obviously be a focal point, and I think he's going to have a big year. So, that's kind of a look at the Athlon. Get ready to see a whole lot more projections and lists. We're kind of into that point of in the year now. Spring ball's done. Summer's coming around, going to be a lot more lists kind of projecting all SEC guys and things like that. So we'll certainly keep an eye on it, and we'll see if Moose ends up getting a little bit more recognition as more lists start to come out. So thanks as always for joining us, everybody, and be sure to hit that like and share button and subscribe to us on Apple iTunes and Spotify to get a notification every time a new podcast drops. And otherwise, we will see you guys next week and have plenty more. So have a good week, everybody.